Okay, well, for anyone who is unfamiliar with the consortium, what we do is write in our name. We connect fire managers and scientists. We're committed to getting fire on the ground in the right places and getting research questions answered. We are one of the 15 fire knowledge exchanges under the Joint Fire Science Program. And like most of you probably, we've realized that there is a need to involve the public in land management, which is what sort of brings us to today's topic of helping to build fire adapted communities. And we're just hoping to learn more about the Neighborhood Ambassador Program and what's made it successful, and hopefully how or if we can adapt it to the Appalachians. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Becca and Allison.
All right. Thank you. And Allison, I've got a full presentation here, but on anything that you want to jump in on that you have something to add, and I might check in a few places, please feel free to. And I think this is a small enough group that if any of you if I see your mute sign come off, I'll know you want to say something or just try to jump in. If we come across something that you really have more questions about during, and then we'll have some time after to answer more questions and get more in depth with whether this might be a good approach for you or not. I have been with Firewise of Southwest Colorado. This is going on my 8th fire season. I work year round, but kind of still think a little bit in fire seasons around here. 8th fire year, I guess. And I was hired on as a coordinator in my county to coordinate volunteers. And when I got into it, I had almost zero fire background experience, some training from my background with the Forest Service, and growing up in the area and having a fairly good knowledge of the ecosystem. And I was really interested in this position as a volunteer neighborhood ambassador coordinator because it was an opportunity to bring community members together. So that's kind of what drew me to the work to begin with. And now I'm kind of, have become a FAC nerd a little bit, I guess. So the term fire adapted communities, or just FAC, gets thrown around a lot, so I didn't want to just roll into this conversation with some of you that I'm just getting the opportunity to meet without kind of saying something about what I mean when I think about fire adapted communities. Fire adapted communities, I think of it as one of those branches or tenets of the National Cohesive Wildland Fire Strategy. If we don't have communities that are prepared and have a culture of living with wildfires and being able to respond to fires when they happen, we don't have the kind of appropriate fuels reduction work around structures and home hardening, then it's very difficult to let fires burn sometimes in places where maybe we would like to be able to, or to put prescribed fire on the ground. And some of those ecological treatments, we can engage homeowners through fire adapted communities and creating more resilient landscapes as well, which we all know fire is a part of those. And so I was going to try kind of with this picture to kind of tell you a little bit of a brief story that leads you through how neighborhood volunteers can help create more fire adapted communities. So communities, we're really talking about the people and everybody kind of finding their role in how to make a community stronger and more resilient to wildfires. And so this was a neighborhood in 2012. This is along about 5 miles down the canyon, one-way road with 35 or 40 homes on it. And in the summer of 2012, they had a wildfire enter that community. And this is the home here of a pair of ambassadors. My husband at the time was a Firewise neighborhood ambassador. And he had kind of gotten stuff going in that neighborhood when 10 years before this fire ever crowned over that ridge behind his house, he was at a community fire meeting where he found out that there was this big circle around the canyon that they lived in, that it was highlighted as one of these very high-risk areas within the county, and he wanted to do something about it. So he immediately started working with his neighbors, doing things around his own house, and made a great deal of headway in that community. And you can imagine without that fire on the ridge, of course, it's much more difficult to get people concerned and engaged in the neighborhood. They just think the forest always looks like it will always look like it always has in the 2 years that they've lived there. So they were able to accomplish defensible space around every single home on the west side of that road in the canyon, had pretty decent defensible space. They had 2 miles of roadway where the forest was thick down to the road. They had accomplished thinning on both sides, back into the private lands, about 150 feet off either side of the road that was thinned. They had lifts, phone trees for emergency evacuation. They had just really done a great deal of work. And so when this fire came into the community, there had been almost 10 years of prep work of people thinking about that fire. The BLM had done work in some areas around this community. And because of that work that was done, this was one of those canyons that went from a fire trucks are not going to go in there, are likely going to stay up here on the highway and watch the fire burn by on our lawn chairs, to, yeah, we can go down there and we can safely defend those homes, and we can take an offensive stance against the fire and backburn behind these homes. And so that really was a great success and example to me of what I mean when I think of a fire-adapted community. I'm talking about that in the context of this presentation as a fire-adapted neighborhood. Okay, so that you can scale that up and you can look at all the things that go into business resilience and everything else, which are, on the large fire-adapted community sense, extremely important. The focus of the neighborhood ambassador approach is really on the people who live there, the residents. So this is Philip and Linda Walters after their hillside was burned. So what is the fire adapted community's neighborhood ambassador approach? Firewise Council of Southwest Colorado got going around 2002, around that same time that Philip Walters in that neighborhood recognized the fire risk to his neighborhood, and started out very much like a fire safety council with a lot of agencies and only a handful of residents, really trying to push brochures and materials and newspaper articles, which was all good, but wasn't necessarily leading to the action that we wanted to see. And so there's this little bit of this study and discussion with some Fort Lewis professors that said, hey, we're hearing that people want to hear from their friends and their family and their neighbors, and that neighbors will listen to neighbors and will emulate their neighbors. So that was really where this got started in Southwest Colorado. And by the end of 2004, there were our inaugural group up there on the right. There were 11 neighborhood ambassadors spread across 3 counties in southwestern Colorado. So not a lot of people, not a lot of neighborhoods. Right now, I think I updated the number, but I didn't update the date. So right now we're sitting at about 134 ambassadors. That was after some extensive cleaning of our list last year to make sure that we were really capturing the people who were still engaged, covering 90 higher neighborhoods. So we have a long ways to go, but you can see that we've worked with a lot of communities and have several counties worth of experience to weigh in on our understanding of how to support these ambassadors. So this is why we want to use these volunteers within their neighborhoods. We all have very limited capacity. All of our partners have limited capacity and are stretched to do what they're mandated to do already. So knowing that neighbors listen to neighbors, there's a lot of incredible skills out there, especially with with our communities of people who are interested in volunteering anyhow. Oftentimes it's more educated retirees. That if we give them the tools and the connections in the background, they can be multipliers for us. They can multiply our impact in their neighborhoods. They can set an example within their neighborhood by doing great work around their house, whether they show it off or it's just seen from the road by all their neighbors driving by. Some of them get really excited and want to go beyond their neighborhoods, and then they add additional capacity to your programs. Philip and Linda Walters, who I just shared with you, they just donated a huge part of some of their his dad's estate and fine jewelry of his mom's and stuff to an auction that we had, and it probably brought in $5,000 or $6,000 of the money that we made at a fundraiser last week, and all of that was also coming in largely from our ambassador community who wanted to show their support. The hours that we get are phenomenal. They record $400,000 to $500,000 a year worth based on the state volunteer rates. That's huge leverage for grants whenever you can do in-kind support. So that's a very important thing that we always have done since the beginning, is tracking volunteer hours. And a volunteer neighborhood ambassador can work at a lot of scales. Here the focus is on the neighborhood scale, but I do want to kind of stretch and get you guys to stretch and think about, are there other places and ways that you would like to see people multiplying your effort in the community, whether it's business leaders, that builder. I believe New Jersey Fire Safe Council is starting to do that a little bit more on the community scale, where you have specific individuals who are able to really share the message in a broader, like, county scale. And then seeing all that engagement from the public really gets your partners more interested as well, and helps guide where work goes on the ground, where it's going to be most impactful, where you have work happen. It enables work to happen on two sides of the fence, or more than two sides of the fence oftentimes. So ambassadors, I did a great exercise with some of them. This was a few years ago, back when I was in that role, to find out what they valued about being part of the neighborhood ambassador program that we have here. And no one said, maybe it was just explicit but no one was really concerned about their home and the things that they said. Like, I just want to protect my house. They wanted to be stewards of their land. They liked being connected to the information that they were getting, the research grants and other opportunities, knowing what was happening with fire, being connected to their neighbors and their experts, and getting resources through the council to get work done, and seeing change at a community scale. So there really is a lot in it for them. We don't provide any other incentives, and we also don't require any membership fees, but that's just how we do it. It's not all a pretty picture. Ambassador, somebody starts out, we started with 11. Well, those people that are still around have been doing it for a very long time, and some of them know more than I do. But we have other people, a new cohort, so to speak, that'll be starting next week. And those folks are all learning as they go. So we have to be able to meet the needs of those different audiences with our communication. All kinds of different people. Some people make better ambassadors than others. And we can dive more into that if you guys want to. It takes a lot of babysitting to keep people motivated and engaged in doing what they said they thought they wanted to do. A lot of them are retirees, so that means a lot of trips, health issues sometimes, not necessarily a lot of physical capacity to do community work days. And then over time, especially those that really pour their whole hearts into making their communities more fire adapted will start to get burned out. You also have the other risk of, oftentimes this is with the newer communities, that will just be asking you so much it's hard to keep up with them. And then staff shit can happen with our ambassadors, right? We've had a couple of them pass away last year. You know, or people get jobs, go back into the workforce, have major injuries and things that don't allow them to do the work and volunteer the way that they would like to. And so that's going to, if you lose somebody and they're the only person in the neighborhood, it can be a challenge to find somebody else and keep that neighborhood engaged. Allison, do you have anything to add?
You know, I would definitely echo the tend to be retirees. What we find here is we have a very high number of veterans, former military, a lot of foresters that live here. And what we found is it really kind of helps give them new purpose to be involved in something like this. Ours is structured a little bit differently, where we try, you know, essentially we try to provide kind of the staff and technical assistance for them. We don't have a true neighborhood ambassador program, but essentially, you know, they are our spark plugs, and we try to empower them the best that we can. And so, you know, the burnout is a very real challenge for us here. A lot of times, our Firewise committees, they've gotten to the point where they will have either annual or biannual rotations on like who's president. And who is really kind of that person that's getting all of the, you know, all of the barrage of questions and going to all these trainings and things like that, because what will, you know, essentially will happen is they're really excited. They start out with a lot of energy, and then we really want to provide them with some technical help to prevent burnout. So they'll be president for 1 year, and then somebody will be behind them to take over, and they will rotate that way. So, you know, and then for us, we use essentially a curbside chipping program called Sweat Equity, which for us is a really relatively small investment with a huge payoff. So we just tell folks, hey, get it to the, you know, the roadside bees, one of our spark plugs, to get the word out. Then folks are really doing that work themselves and getting it to the roadside so that we're able to get rid of the debris for them. So ours is really incentivizing the action and using spark plugs to get the word out about those programs that are going on.
Yeah, and thanks, Allison. So and I'm going to get a little bit more into the how-to here, and the enabling conditions for having these folks. So that's great in the context. Thanks for using the term spark plug too, because that's a huge base of people that we have in this country who essentially already are what I would call a neighborhood ambassador within the neighborhood, and we just have a different name for the program. But what I'm trying to promote and what we're trying to deliver, much of this information is in a toolkit that Jen will send out as well, a draft version of a toolkit she's going to send out along with this recording, is we have to figure out how to take this more as an approach and how to support those spark plugs better. So I'm trying to give kind of a toolkit of ways to support people that you may think of as spark plugs and find more of them and get more of that activity going to create fire adapted communities. So that's really, in a lot of places, there are strong councils like Project Wildfire that hold up and have programs that support their ambassadors, spark plugs. And in other places, there's one person with Firewise Communities USA who covers a very large area, and a lot of the resources are online, and there's not as much opportunity to interact and network with other ambassadors who are doing similar things in their neighborhoods areas that they can start to learn from each other with. So that's the distinction that I would make there, I guess, a little bit with trying to give some guidance to this approach today. How do we foster an environment for their success? And we have, I think we're about 15 or 16, maybe about to get 17 communities that have Firewise USA recognition. So we do promote that, but not everybody has to be. We don't start off with that usually in our programs for a variety of reasons, because we want to really see that they have some sustained effort going on before they gain entrance to Firewise USA recognition. So hopefully that clarified a little. So the guide toolkit that Jen will be sharing out talks a little bit about, gives this overview that I kind of just provided as to what's in it for you and what's in it for them. And then it goes into what you need to get started and kind of how to do the work. Some tips on recruitment, training, education. So I'm going to just try to do a fairly quick rundown through these. I'm sorry there's not a ton of pictures. I'll try not to do death by PowerPoint and tell you a little bit more with regards to the stories. So yeah, here's the main things that you really need to figure out if you have before you decide to jump in full steam to supporting ambassadors and getting together as a network in your area. You need to have that culture of volunteerism. These are volunteers that we're looking for, and you don't want somebody who's just going to sign up and wants a card. They've got to be willing to do some outreach in the neighborhood. It takes some coordination. You got to have time and or funding to cover that time to coordinate all these volunteers. And that can be very small to start. I think it started on about 20 hours a month here in Southwest Colorado in 2002. And it's grown to 3 volunteer coordinators plus some other folks within our organization for our 3 different counties. Partners need to be engaged. You don't have to have everybody at the table. This question came up with a community in California that was looking at using the ambassador approach, and we're like, they had one fire department that was just adamantly like, we don't want to be a part of this, and several others that were totally on board, and all the other partners were on board. Well, go ahead. You don't need that department. Work in the other areas. Do what you can, but partners are important. And how are you going to communicate? Do you have somebody who's a good communicator and willing to keep up communication? And I think, let's see how we are for time. I'm going to skip through these a little bit more quickly, but I have a series of questions here that you can ask to think about if you have the right level of volunteerism. So maybe it isn't retirees, maybe it's a population like Allison has in Deschutes of a lot of veterans. With the coordination, you just have to have somebody who volunteers can go to and ask questions, and who's regularly outreaching and connecting with volunteers in person and over the phone, and not afraid to pick up the phone. And then the coordinator also kind of takes some of the load off of partners in this, because instead of partners getting 1,000 calls from 1,000 different directions, you might be getting calls from a coordinator who knows what's going on in the different neighborhoods and can kind of bring the different needs together to you, and that can be really valuable as well. Here's some of the things that partners bring to the table. And a lot more. Meeting space, financial support, communication, GIS can be huge. Okay. So that's kind of a quick overview, and then I have some kind of steps through the recruitment training and the rest of how to get started with facts. And we'll take that one bite at a time, but I think it'd be good if anybody has any questions just about the idea of neighborhood ambassadors first, so we could touch on those. Was it clear? Okay. So sometimes ambassadors will be frustrated when they get started because they just want everybody to go cut down a whole bunch of trees the next day. So we always have to remind them to kind of take things one bite at a time. And same in getting an approach started. You know, if you don't already have a curbside chipper program going, you don't have to establish a curbside chipper program in order to get volunteers engaged at a community scale. So here's a few different ideas of how to find these volunteers who might make good ambassadors. Any educational programs that you're doing on wildfire preparedness, site visits. Yeah, those home site visits face to face. If you find somebody that's really interested in what you're talking about and seems to have a little time on their hands, those are perfect people. Workshops. Allison kind of mentioned succession, and one way that can work. We ask some of ours because they don't all have Firewise committees. Sometimes it's just one person in the neighborhood to try to find a replacement when they leave, but that doesn't always happen. And then going through your other communications lists. We have had people pick up rat cards and call off the street and become great ambassadors, which is kind of surprising, but it does happen. And then the idea of tiered participation levels. There's not a lot of that being implemented right now, but I think there's a huge opportunity to allow let somebody come into a kind of a fire council meeting that you may be having anyhow, even if they don't really feel like they're a member of the council. General members of the public who just want information for themselves, and over time, as they start doing work, they'll probably get more engaged, and they might get to the next stage where they really want to promote more work in their neighborhood. So somebody starting off the street might know nothing about wildfire. So there's a need to get them trained, get them up to speed a little bit with some basics so that they can be knowledgeable for their own land and somewhat knowledgeable within their neighborhood, and know when to reach out to experts. So we do that in Southwest Colorado with an orientation. I know there's some other kind of master's program models. And I think, Allison, your guys' master's program model was more oriented towards professionals, is that right?
That's correct. We've had a couple that are very similar to kind of the masters. So we had one that was designed after like the master woodland or master gardeners, master woodland managers, called Citizen Fire Academy. What we actually found was we had more folks that have, been involved in fire adapted communities and Firewise take that. Than kind of that bringing new folks in. But it was a way to kind of give them some more training and kind of bolster. And then we've had a couple that are, that training is strictly for professionals. And we tend to have more results that way. So kind of that master gardeners and master woodland managers course. We tend to see more professionals take those, at least locally.
Okay. And the orientation we run, we have a pretty extensive resource notebook that has contacts for all of the fire departments and forestry agencies in the region. It has a whole lot of brochures and resource materials so that they can choose from the ones that they like It's got resource library with web addresses and great places to go for additional information for different things. And so that's something that we try to equip people with up front. It's really not clean and online yet, which would be nice because we're in a time when a lot of people need that. It doesn't matter if it's online though, or if it's in a hard form, which a lot of people appreciate. You're still going to get calls from volunteers with a whole lot of things that they could have found in their notebooks. So that's just the role of the coordinator, is taking care of that. And then in addition to that notebook and talking about, here's the different ways that you can be an ambassador. Here's all the different kinds of work days you might orchestrate, or education events that you might do in your neighborhood. We also spend some time on forest health and fire behavior with a couple of our key partners, which in our case is usually the State Forest Service and the BLM prevention and mitigation specialists that we have in our area. So they get kind of the one-time overview to make sure they're up to speed, and then there's all kinds of ongoing stuff. And this might be the education. This can be all the Firewise and RSG, in fact, webinars and materials that are available, courses that you can take online yourself, or localized in-service trainings or things that we do kind of at our fire council meetings, which really are more of ambassadors meetings than what, if you're familiar with fire safe councils, you might think of as more of a traditional, a lot of partners there. These are really heavy on a lot of neighborhood ambassadors. And so we'll do different, just keeping the information going. What can you, insurance, whatever the topic of the day is. So making sure you have these ongoing opportunities is very important. And in between those kind of in-person education, you also have to be able to keep up with folks. And there's so many ways to do that now. And I don't think that there's any one right way. It doesn't get any easier as a new way of communication comes around. It's just one more thing that we kind of have to do. And that's face-to-face. You got to have some of that time, if at all possible, with those volunteers, or it's not probably going to be as successful. Do you have anything on communications, Allison?
I would really just kind of echo what you said, is that we need to be so flexible in the way that we communicate, because the folks that we work with are so varied. So, I mean, it puts a little bit of, it makes it a little hard on us, especially when a new platform or something like that comes up. But, those face-to-face pieces are critical, but making sure that whatever communication strategy you're using fits the audience, and making sure that you're flexible. I mean, it makes it hard for us, but it's critical to success and to engagement.
Yeah, we've gotten to where we ask sometimes now. I mean, it used to be everybody just wanted to have a phone call. And then we actually got a new coordinator on who really liked to do a whole lot via email. And there were certain people who were just kind of dropping off and were going, what's going on? Oh, well, they don't know this person, and they're just getting regular emails, and they're not getting to talk and have a direct, it's really easy to not respond to an email. It's a lot harder to not respond to a phone call. So we've gotten to where we ask with some of our programs now, do you prefer phone or email communication? The connections that you're going to build, you're basically, through neighborhood ambassadors, kind of creating a mini network. During those in-services or orientations, you want to make sure that partners are getting engaged, meeting those residents, your neighborhood ambassadors, and sharing information back and forth with each other. And the sharing really goes very strongly both ways. And we've gotten a lot better in some of our communications here in Southwest Colorado about making sure ambassadors are having time at all of our regular meetings to share with each other. they often have a whole lot to show and share each other. And we're always tickled when we find out that one of them invited another one over to their neighborhood to show off something that they did because the other ambassador was thinking about doing something similar and wanted to see how it went and learn all those lessons. And that happens fairly regularly. Another thing that we worked down here in Southwest Colorado to help with that network is we actually did a survey of all of our ambassadors and full list of best practices from have they gotten funding, what is their what kind of emergency response considerations have they changes have they made in their neighborhood, like addressing or adding water or signage, things like that, defensible space, just kind of this full list of best practices, and then shared that out to all of them so they can see, oh wow, this neighborhood is similar size to mine or similar landscape, and they've done this, this, and that I'm really interested in doing and don't have much experience in. So that's the way that we've tried to help them connect with each other. And then a lot of those connections continue to build through partners, bringing experts and partners, which are usually our partners, into the neighborhoods, and referrals. Us as coordinating those neighborhood ambassadors, referring to experts, as well as referrals among ambassadors to each other or to other community members. I don't know why it went to that. So here's some of the I don't know why that one's there. I apologize. So some of the things that you need to have to share out with neighborhood ambassadors is you really want to start where you are. You guys probably all have lots of programs that you're already running, and the reason that I'm referring to the neighborhood ambassador program that we have now is more of an approach, because that's been confusing to people. To think of it as a program, it's really a method for trying to multiply the efforts of all the other programs that we have. And those programs that we have already are specific to the needs that we've seen in our community. The slash disposal programs seem to be huge. Mini grants at a neighborhood scale as a program that came about to encourage new ambassadors to spur action with new ambassadors in their communities. Doing training and giving support for their wildfire protection planning, providing them with workshops if you're doing those already. Those are the kinds of things that kind of keep neighborhood ambassadors engaged. And so the idea of the ambassador approach is not to think that you have to run out and start a bunch of new programs. The idea is to help leverage the programs you already have by finding more people to get engaged in them. And then finally, with our ambassadors, we have to celebrate success. And there's lots of ways to do that. You can do it locally. The handwritten thank you note is often huge. One of the ways we do that here is through Firewise Communities USA recognition. That's once they've been involved for a while, they usually really deserve that recognition. And even the National Wildfire Mitigation Awards, that we've had several neighborhood ambassadors receive those national awards here in Southwest Colorado. And part of that is writing them up, right, and giving recognition for the amazing work that some of these volunteers do. So I think somewhere my succession slide might have gotten lost here, but that's okay. We talked a tiny bit about the succession, but really trying to get your neighborhood ambassadors to find somebody to fill in after them, and communicating often. with ambassadors will give you clues if somebody's thinking they're not sticking around, so that you have time for some recruitment in those neighborhoods. So this is a quote I wanted to share from, there's Philip Walters again, doing a tour in his neighborhood after that fire. And he asked, not whether you've done enough mitigation, but what more can you do? And so my response to that is kind of, what more can we do for them, for these ambassadors? So that's kind of, I think that's all I have on the slides side of things. And we have some time for questions. So please feel free to unmute and have a little more conversation and find out what you need.
Hi, Rebecca. This is Todd. Could you talk a little bit more about that, about the toolkit? I wasn't sure if that was going to be a report that was coming out and when that might be available.
Yeah, and I may even be able to see here if I can figure out how to pull it up. I actually sent it to Jen this morning in a draft version of the toolkit. And I will see if I'm able to pull that up. But the toolkit's going to dive a tiny bit deeper into a few of the topics I shared, give an overview, and hopefully enough questions for you and a group of partners to decide, is this something we should pursue? And if so, let's come up with our plan for recruitment and what programs do we already have to share with these people, and how are we going to get them trained and up to speed and keep ongoing communication going. So it kind of goes through all of those with a handful of tips and examples in it. And then it also has links to quite a few sample resources, which I think we need to build, but there's some that we thought were really valuable starter resources, like a coordinator job description, volunteer commitment, and liability waivers. Permission forms for neighborhood work and neighborhood introduction letters for residents to share out and say, hey, I'm your neighborhood ambassador. Let's get involved in wildfire preparedness together and have a barbecue. 50 ideas for action, some things like that that are in a resource folder. So okay. I think Jen will send that out after this. And then based on if there's things in there that you would like to know more about, the one she's going to send out, at least to this group, has my contact information on it as well. And through the Fact Learning Network, you can reach myself or Allison there as well. And we can improve that toolkit as we need to.
Yeah, okay. Todd, I'll send that along to you. And then anyone else who wants it, if you want to type your email address into the chat box, I'll make sure you get it.
Okay, great. Okay, thanks, Rebecca.
Yeah. I know you guys have more questions.
I actually have a question. I saw Jonathan's comment on the side about going through HOAs. And I'm curious to hear more about that, either from Jonathan or if you, Allison or Becca, have gone through HOAs to find your spark plugs.
Yeah, that's a great question. A lot of our communities do have homeowners associations that are involved. I think when I got involved, the county that I work in actually doesn't have very many functioning HOAs. So we have a lot fewer of them in the area that I work in. Your state usually has a list of homeowners associations and the officers or the contacts for those homeowners associations. You should be able to get through one of your state regulatory agencies, and it's probably different in every state anyhow. Or county, GIS departments, often, or in realtors associations also often have that kind of information. And so the trick there with getting into those neighborhoods is often getting a spot on their annual HOA agendas to talk about wildfire risk and say, hey, we really ought to develop a committee out here for this neighborhood and find at least one person who we can train up as an ambassador and really kind of lead the charge in this neighborhood. And Allison's exactly right. That if you have a couple, 2 or 3 people in a neighborhood, there's usually a lot better sustained effort than if it's just one person. And they have different skills to bring to the table. With the non-ambassador communities, it's often just finding that person who asks you out for a site visit or something who is willing to like host a potluck at their house, and then you kind of help them get communications materials out to the neighborhood. And that can look a variety of different ways.
So I'll add a little bit on HOAs. We go through HOAs. They're kind of our ace in the hole a lot of times, because they, a lot of times have the CNRs, they have officers, they have people who are invested. Another tool that we use around here for folks that essentially don't do HOAs, they don't want, to have CCNRs, things like that, are special road districts. They're actually a special tax assessment district where they're there to talk and work on the roads, and they are in communication with everyone. So they are kind of our central point of contact. So our special road districts or any special taxing districts, if you have folks that are already organized enough to be paying a special tax assessment, they can organize around, wildfire preparedness, whether that's, they want to be Firewise, whatever else. And like Rebecca was saying, if you have somebody who calls you out for a site visit, they're looking to not just prepare their home, but a lot of times when you're leaving, their next question is, what else can I do? And that is that time to try to turn them into a spark plug and talk to them about how they can organize in their community. I loved Rebecca's comment about the, it is baby steps. This is eating an elephant one step at a time. You'll get folks that are super excited and they want all the trees cut down all at once. And that can really turn off a community. And so talking to those folks about, yeah, we know that's the end game, but what are all the steps in between now and that end game? And so looking at special tax districts are huge for us. For those places that don't have formal HOAs, they still have board members. They have central points of contact. And they can at least act like the liaison between, Project Wildfire and these other community members. And so HOAs are huge, but really talking to the spark plugs when you're out there already talking to them about their call to action, that's normally where we get folks to get on board.
Great. And I went ahead and just pulled up the toolkit, and here's kind of the table of contents for it, so you can see some of the stuff that's in there. It's really kind of taking the same format, but more digestible than the quick death by PowerPoint I just gave you, with some time to, the full set of questions about, do you really have the volunteers in your area to do this kind of thing? And then some of the, the recruitment strategies, like Allison just explained, described in a little bit more depth. Some example programs. So, what other questions do y'all have? So, is there anybody? Oh, go ahead. Somebody gonna jump in?
Yeah, Becca, that's me again. I have a question, because one of the things that we struggle with in the Appalachians is even just the very basic convincing people that fire is a part of this landscape. And I'm not sure if you guys have those issues where you are, because you're more known for the big fires, but if either you or Allison or really anyone else can talk to or speak to some of the work you've done, if you've had that issue, and how you've convinced people, A, that there's fire on the landscape, and B, that they need to do something about it.
I'll take a first stab at that, and then anybody else can jump in. So people have to be motivated to take action, right? And one of the first pieces in the notebook that we share, and that I like to kind of frame things around with ambassadors, is this overcoming barriers to action. And that's one of the resources in our templates. You want your ambassadors to know, hopefully you have a handful of people that understand there is some risk. And once they do, you got to give them the tools and the where to go to show that, hey, there is this risk. Is there a state wildfire risk assessment portal? Is there an example? Is there maybe there, fires, even little fires near a neighborhood, and it doesn't have to be that close. Oftentimes people have no idea that there was a fire right there. It got put out, they were at work, they came home, they saw no fire truck. So giving your ambassadors or recruiting for ambassadors when those things happen, by just leaving that little message that, hey, did you know your home was threatened by wildfire? Or giving the volunteer the tools to say, here's the places where you can see where all the fires have happened in our area over the last so long, or here's the wildfire risk assessment for our county, and you see we're in this orange and red area here. That's how we address it, I guess, because even in our areas, there's some lack of belief that wildfire could happen to them. I was going to ask if any of you who are on are kind of really, this isn't much time to think about it, just this little overview, but kind of how seriously are you guys thinking about, or what do you have already in terms of neighborhood volunteers?
Well, I can
Okay.
speak to at least in the Southern Blue Ridge, we do have some pretty active community groups and volunteer groups that are really interested in volunteering in our national forests and around trails and things like that. But we don't have a whole lot of momentum in terms of communities becoming fire adapted. There's a few standouts for sure. But yeah, we haven't seen a whole lot. So that was one of the reasons that we wanted to put on this webinar, is to sort of spread the word and give an idea of really how to get started.
Did this kind of, what was most helpful in thinking about this to you today? Is there anything that you hadn't thought about, or is it all new? Yeah, we can follow up more on that maybe. Jen, maybe you can give me more feedback on that after the fact. But the FACT network is, we're here all as members to help build programs and make us all be as successful as we can. So if it seems like something where there's the volunteers out there and they're just not engaged, and we need to find some ways to try to get people engaged, I'm happy to help strategize on that anytime.
Great, thank you.
Just looking at outreach in general, one of the things that we have coming up in North Carolina is a fire focus workshop where we're actually bringing in teachers from across the state to kind of give them a panel discussion so that they can have topics and discussion about prescribed fire. And of course, we're going to work Firewise in with that. And a lot of that was organized through our wildfire mitigation specialists with the State Forest Service. So, anytime you can get children or get teachers involved who can then go through the children and then take it home to mom and dad, just as far as looking for spark plugs and looking for the ambassadors and trying to get the word out, I'm kind of looking forward to being a part of that and seeing where we can go with it.
Yeah, I think you could have a whole group of elementary or middle schools starting to get into high school. They have too much other work they have to do, but I mean, it could be a club, right? It could be a school club of youth ambassadors. There may only be one school that really has that going on the Firewise USA side in Texas. Maybe there's others now, I'm not sure, but I think there's huge opportunity there. Aside from retirees, that's the other population that sometimes has free time on their hands. And parents listen to their kids. All right. Anything else? Okay.
I think that's all.
Well, thanks. Thank you, Jen, for inviting us and letting us share this, and hopefully you'll give some feedback